First of all, I want to say congratulations to everybody in this room. I've been a reviewer for a long time, not this year. I couldn't for a number of reasons, but I really have a lot of respect for the work you're doing. I think you're doing a lot of things that are leading our field. I'm really excited to have an opportunity to talk with you and challenge you to even take a step upward as we move into this crazy future that we're building, and that it's going to be so radically different than anything anybody has ever known. Do you think so? Okay. So just think about smart for a minute. And think about smart cities. We're building smart cities where buildings can talk to each other. The electrical grid is sending electricity around in various and sundry ways. Cameras all over the place. Cities are getting smart, right? And maybe your city is one of the leaders. Also, manufacturing plants are getting smart. Trucks are talking to forklifts, and forklifts are talking to boxes, and boxes are talking to the what do you call it? The conveyor. Thank you. Okay. Also, we know that something like an airplane or a car, we're making it smart. It's smart. Its skin is getting smart. It's able to sense what's going on in itself. It's able to communicate with people on the ground to fix itself. So smart in technology in our transportation system. And also smart home. Think about what's happening in our homes with our refrigerators talking to the Safeway grocery store. And with us being able to manage everything with our little cell phones. Smart homes are beginning to come into play. And there's even smart toys that kids are playing with. So smart is pretty much everywhere. And think about what's driving it, and think about how we're going to be moving into the future. McKinsey says that in 20 years, and I actually think they're conservative, 45% of all the jobs that exist now will be automated out of existence. And you know that today, organizations really are more defined by where they are in the supply chain than anywhere else. So the way we think about an organization starts with a customer and moves back, and the boundaries are shifting, right? We live in an information world that is getting more and more cluttered and becoming more and more the source of power. And when information is power, you see a lot of money and forces going into it to manipulate our opinions. And that's happening in not only in the commercial arena, but also in the political arena, as we very well know, all over the world. So we're being driven by a lot of forces that are causing massive shifts that the world has never known. In fact, many people are saying that the era of Homo sapiens is ending and the era of Homo Deus is beginning as we begin to design ourselves and what we're going to be like in the future. So I'd like you to just, as a way of kind of getting into this, because I want us to look at what it means to be a smart enterprise. Because our enterprise has to keep up with what's happening around us and with the powers that we've unleashed. All right. So my point in this talk is that it's time to unleash the smart enterprise and to help people unleash themselves into the smart enterprise. But what is a smart enterprise? So I hope to provide some insight into how we might think about it. First of all, let's think about how we have fundamentally thought about organizations for a long time, and it really goes back to the 17th century rational people. The idea is that if we just break things into the right parts and organize them perfectly, then we will get a perfect result. And so we have designed organizations with the organization chart in mind, where people are put into boxes, as you know, where we have a job description, where there's a boss-subordinate relationship. Think about the language boss-subordinate and what that says, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. There are many good things that come from having a hierarchy, but one of the things that probably isn't so good is that it's come to be known as a domination hierarchy rather than one that can actually get work done. The other thing that has been dominating our fundamental way of thinking about organizations is behaviorism. And the fact that we look at people as black boxes, and I'm going to try to make the point today that we are still doing that. No matter how hard we try, it's very easy to see people as black boxes, where if we could manipulate the inputs, manipulate the outputs, and manipulate the reinforcement, then we will get the results that we want. And we leave that messy thing in the black box alone. Okay? You know, when you think about it, that way of thinking, if you know systems theory, there are levels of systems where there's greater and greater complexity as you move into the higher levels of systems. That way of thinking is more appropriate to thermostats and clocks, right? And we've tried, and there are many good things that come from it, but in today's age, as we'll see, and as you know very well, this isn't enough. We really have to move our mindsets, our mental models, up to the organization and societal and human levels. And human living systems operate according to different rules. Okay? So that's going to be something that will keep coming up as we go through thinking about the smart enterprise. How do we unleash that kind of a system? When I ask people frequently to draw the organization, you know what I almost always get? Is that on the left. And that tells me that embedded inside the mental model is that way of thinking. Okay? So let's challenge our mental models as we work through. We all know this whole, we're living in a volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous world where there are many forces swirling around for change. In particular, it's demanding that we be agile, that we be innovative, that we be anticipatory, that we be aligned. Alignment is a really big theme in a smart enterprise. And learning, of course, is at the heart of the process because it is the one process that defines us as living systems. So we want to be sure that we're designing to be able to achieve these kinds of results. Now, what do we do? In many cases, organizations are sort of sailing these choppy seas with their boats, and they're trying to, you know, maybe do a little bit of better training of the seamen, and so we're trying to just make these old boats go faster and faster and faster. And some companies are actually trying to do better than that. They're putting up what I would consider to be bigger sails. So maybe, and this actually, many of the companies here, you're doing a lot of these things, which I think is a really amazing step forward in developing a smart enterprise. But think about what you may be doing in some of these areas, that you're making big learning investments. That's something that characterizes people in this room and companies in this room. You are using technology, and maybe you're getting into big data and artificial intelligence. That's a really big trend. Another bigger sail that's going up. More appreciation and rewards. That's a really big thing in today's world, is we appreciate more. Heck with all that negative feedback or critical feedback or constructive feedback. We just should be appreciating, right? And that's kind of the theme du jour in many organizations today. And it is something that has been lacking and is very important for a living system. So we put up those bigger sails there. We're also trying to find more personalized. This is a big theme that's up now. More personalized support, right? You've got your mobile. You want to really have things just in time for people. You want to have it really be there for their needs. You're also doing more about engagement. And that is a very important theme. And I'll have some things to say about that a little bit later, too. You're trying to develop better strategies. You're trying to align all of these systems so that they don't trip all over each other. And you're doing a lot to develop teamwork. And these are all wonderful things. They are the equivalent of putting bigger sails on an old hull in many cases. Now, are any of you sailors in this room? Okay. Well, it's one thing in sailing. No, the question obviously is this a smart enterprise? But in sailing, if you put too big a sail on a hull that can't take it, it goes down. So there are many signs that this is happening in organizations. In fact, I've been tracking the successive change initiatives over the last 30, 40 years has really not changed that much. Change initiatives are generally deemed as not meeting the standards that organizations would like about 65% of the time. Now, that's a pretty awful statistic. Also, our stress levels are up, right? We have a lot of stress, a lot of people that are getting isolated, a lot more need. There's almost PTSD in many cases in the jobs. People are really, they're working 24/7 and not really paying much attention to themselves and their own health. Recently, and try to keep up with the kind of recent findings, but Aon Hewitt has been tracking engagement for many years. And their conclusion is that in the last couple of years, engagement, while it was trending up just slightly in about this average of 63-64%, which I don't think is very high. Do you? So it's average 63-64%. It was kind of rising 0.5% or so a year for the last few years. Last year it dropped. And here's their theory about it that I think relates to us, and this is reported in their 2017 report. So it's okay if I read a piece of that? These changes, it wasn't enough that, if that wasn't enough, rapid technology advances that could make many jobs obsolete are no longer the subject of science fiction and are here to stay. Driverless cars, drones, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other technologies are competing for jobs like never before. These changes present new challenges for CEOs, human resource leaders, and leaders of all levels. Left unaddressed, populism and more sophisticated technology advances will create further angst in organizations and thus will cause the work experience and employee engagement to decline even more. And this is from people that are doing studies. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there, but I like to focus on really big research that's coming to some conclusions that we can somewhat rely on, not fake news. The Economist just came out with a very interesting finding. It was just in the last Economist. And their finding is that innovation in research is going up significantly, but the ability of the organization to use it is going down, which equates to me as the hull of a sailboat. We put bigger sails up, but if we don't redesign the hull, then we're not going to be able to carry the innovation that's already there. They have an interesting way of talking about it. The problem, in other words, is not that oranges are in short supply or are already squeezed dry, but rather that of the 10 workers at the juice bar, only one has learned to do the squeezing. Isn't that interesting? So investment, here's for us, investments in education and training to expand the share of workers that can use new ideas, or in the quality of management to improve how effectively ideas are applied within firms, would do wonders for growth, even if the world's scientists are idly scratching their heads. So this, to me, is a clarion call for some major, big, hairy, audacious work in our field. You think? And this is in the business press. Could I say one piece about the managers? Sure. Let's see. Just in the last sentence or so. Investments in education and training to expand the share of workers that can use new ideas, or in the quality of management to improve how effectively ideas are applied within the firms, would do wonders for growth. Is that what you're, okay. So I think we're being challenged here, and I want the people in this room to take up this challenge and go for it. You know, I lived in South Africa. Nelson Mandela said, you know, we need to live our lives out loud. He was quoting another philosopher. His name escapes me right now. But let's live our lives out loud in this world so we can take it forward. And there are many other reasons to do it that I want to highlight as we move on. So we need to redesign the hull, and that's hard. It's easy to put bigger sails up and hope that we don't crash. But look at what happened in the Volvo race. Look at what's happening. And I think this is fascinating. The new sailboats are not even designed just to sail in water. They're designed to sail in air. It's really fascinating. They're rethinking the context of sailing. Like, we need to rethink the context of work. So what do we need to do? You know, we need to think about moving from this more mechanized way of looking at the organization. Again, there are many things, you're not going to just not have structure, but we need to move to a living system way of viewing the world, and it has implications for almost everything we do. The organization really does operate like a network. There was an old thing when I first started to work many years in manufacturing where they said the quickest way to shut down a plant was for everybody to follow the rules. Because organizations are living. They're solving problems all the time and breaking the rules, going across from one box to the other sideways and so on. And networks work differently than hierarchies. They work a lot. The alignment of networks, a human network, relies on shared values and purpose and a real clear, kind of a clear sense that we're all headed in the same direction, right? It also relies on something called weak ties, where not our direct connections like boss-subordinate, but those other connections with other people in the system are very important to our being able to get our work done. So understanding how networks work as living systems is a critical kind of capacity, I think, for us. And the other thing is to recognize that within this living network is our, what did you say, 22,000 people work in Jockey?
Yes.
22,000 people. 22,000 people. Each of them has 100 billion neurons, 1,000 trillion connections operating inside of what looks like a black box. And beyond that, that immense capacity of the brain, everybody admits, is much more profound than any computer we have invented now, okay? And it has more capacity if we just could provide it more sensory connections, okay? So think about everyone in this room. I mean, just look around here. It looks like we're just these little kind of closed-in things. But every single one of us is like that. Imagine every one of us looking like that, with all of this potential, with all of those tools inside, our amygdalas, sort of giving us emotional overtones, and our hippocampus sorting everything out and sending stuff to the long-term memory. And the long-term memory trying to figure out how to connect this idea with stuff it already knows. And with your chemicals raging, managing your stress and deciding whether you're awake and paying attention and having fun and achieving goals and all of that stuff. And your brain waves, which, by the way, you can do quite a bit to train. I did several years of biofeedback, and I'm absolutely convinced that you can make all sorts of adjustments in how you balance particularly your theta, alpha, and beta waves, which are really important in learning. So we should be playing brain music, and we should be helping people be able to unleash that capacity in themselves. We have the capacity, we just have not recognized it. Okay? Okay, so with all of that in mind, what is the secret of creating the smart enterprise? Well, I think we all have ideas about that, but I will certainly share mine. Okay, I'm going to give you 3 suggestions. One is that it's very important to begin to unleash each individual. I know we're talking a lot about teams, but at the heart of it, the individual is the ultimate unit of performance. And that's where I think we need to be focusing a lot of our attention for unleashing. So here is Joe. And Joe has an interesting, let's say Joe is out there working today. And Joe is part of a structure. He has a manager. He's got his job. By the way, the performance management system thinks that's all that exists because it's always a conversation between the boss and him. Doesn't really often involve other people. So there's Joe, and sometimes it does, but the heart of it often is that. So Joe is there trying to do that job. But Joe is also a member of the pulsing network, and will often be pulled into conversations that relate to what's happening in other parts, right, of the system. In the meantime, Joe probably also has some projects he's working on, right? maybe one, maybe two. It's always interesting to me to find out how many projects people are working on the average in the company, because that tells you a lot about how important self-management is, actually. And then he's also probably, he's working away, trying to balance these projects, trying to do his job, and then all of a sudden, the customer, there's a crisis. A customer has a request. Well, we're a customer-focused organization, so we drop everything and we focus on the customer, right? And we kind of try to address that issue. But he also has a development agenda. I'm trying to build this skill. I'm trying to become smarter as a project manager. I'm trying to develop my communication skills. So that's another overlay on the stuff that he has to think about. And in the midst of all of this, now there's a big crisis. A machine breaks down, or some technology isn't working, and now I've got to deal with that. Does this kind of feel like real life? And then into this mix, lo and behold, the boss marches in and says, hey, what is your name? David. David, you know, I've got something for you to do. Well, what does Joe do? Joe is making decisions every moment of every day about how to spend his time. And guess where he's going to spend it in this scenario if he's in a left side type organization? Where do you think? With the boss request. Does that tell you something about the mental model? So the first thing we need to really get into is the fact that individuals are the managing directors of their own jobs. They have customers, they need to get feedback, they have goals. If we can help people see that they're a little business within the business and see themselves as a business, then things like performance management are a business process for them. They're not a personal kind of, devastating event. They're a little business within a business. Every business needs goals and feedback and has customers and so on. I did a project, a very interesting one in South Africa years ago that I think about a lot, and it was for the national standards government agency that sets national standards, like Underwriters Laboratory, that kind of thing. And we had a session with all of the executives and all levels of people. And we were talking about how to help everybody align toward a common purpose, basically, like we all often do. And there was this one old guy, old black guy, who was probably not literate. Okay, it was a 2-day session. So he was pretty excited during the session the first day. And then the next morning he came back in and he said, Mrs. McLagan, thank you very much. And I said, for what? He said, I went home last night and I told my wife that I have customers. Turns out he was the gardener. So I said, well, who did you think were your customers? Well, it's all the people that come and look at my beautiful garden. And it's also all the people that come to the building and ask me where this office is and where that office is. He says, I'm like a receptionist. I have customers. And it uplifted his sense of his job immensely. Customers, deliverables, feedback he could get. There's a mindset of being the MD of your own job that's extremely empowering. And I'd like to see that unleashed everywhere. Everywhere. Comments about that? How do you feel about that? It's a really important thing in this era where people feel so disempowered. It's a challenge for us. Okay. The second suggestion, and they all fit into the same paradigm, is to suggest that we think very seriously about the relationships between people in our business. I think relationships are the heart of culture. If somebody says, I want to change culture, help me figure out what the culture is. I'll go in and watch how the relationships work, and I'll tell you right then what the culture is. Because you can define it in one of 4 ways. This culture is either conflicted, where people are not working together, there's not a lot of trust, there's fear, They're saying what the boss thinks. In this case, the economics of this is one employee plus one boss is less than one in productivity, because we're spending so much time in conflict maybe, or in second guessing and so on. Does that make sense? So that's one possibility for a cultural tone. The second is a dependent culture. And here's where, okay, the boss pretty much, somebody decides and somebody else does. So we wait for other people to make the decisions. Now, that doesn't, of course, executives have to make strategic decisions and so on. But to wait until the boss kind of says to do something, or to be looking constantly to the boss for approval and all of that, is a sign of a dependent mindset. And it says to me that we're not unleashing a lot of energy here, because the one person plus the boss in productivity, it's taking two people to do the job. So that's a productivity of one. And the third option is a little better in the economics. It's 1 and 1 is 2, at least. And here, everybody's working toward the same goal, but they don't really synergize much. So people are, yeah, I got it. We're doing it. And then there's some self-management going on here. And then the fourth one is partnering, where people are really putting their heads together, not afraid to take some risks, working together, having a partnering attitude. The hierarchy, in many cases, doesn't mean domination. It means a decision rights, and so on. So we have those 4 kinds of relationships. And I'd suggest that getting from number 2 to 3 is a really difficult job, because we've designed our systems and our organizations for dependency. Boss, subordinate, most all of our systems, and I'm going to show you some examples in a little bit. Many of our systems are still surreptitiously dependency-oriented. So we want to move from that left side to that right side and get more of the benefits there. But we need to get across that great divide, which is a very tough thing to do. Okay. And the third thing I want to suggesting, is that we have to rethink learning. And that's what this book, Unstoppable You, is about. But to highlight just the key, we need to upgrade to another version of mental software in learning. And I'd suggest that there are 4 versions of software that are around today. This is mental software, not computer software. So when we're born, my 50-year-old son just had a little baby, and I was kind of thinking a lot about brain development while she was in utero, and it's kind of fun to sort of watch that development. Now, if any of you have little babies in your lives, you sort of watch the development. But we're born with this immense capacity to learn. We learn by trial and error. We learn by imitation. It's just part of who we are. It's life. It's life. It's being alive. So we're born with programming for learning 1.0. And then we go to school. And in school, we start to get pulled in a little bit. And we learn, and it's the job of school, part of the job of school, to help us bring in all of the past knowledge from society, learn society's norms and all of that stuff. And we learn how to study, and we kind of cram in a lot of stuff, and we try to accelerate our knowledge from all of history, if you will. And that brings us to learning 2.0, where we start to master sort of how to manage subject matter and all of that. I'd like to think that this is being refined a little bit, but you get, I think, what I mean about 2.0. So we go to school. And then we leave school, and we're thrown out into this big world, and we have a family, we have kids, we go to work, we become a member of society. All of these are things that now we're on our own. And somehow we figure out how to do it. Somehow we figure out how to self-manage and self-direct around our own problems. And that's great. But I would maintain that that is not good enough in an age of artificial intelligence, augmented reality, speed of change that's obsoleting jobs at the rate of maybe, 45% in the next 20 years. That's not enough. We need to move to something that is a lot smarter. And let's call that learning 4.0. It's like an computer upgrade. So I want to see everybody upgrading their mental learning software. So what does that mean? It means, at its heart, becoming really super good at these 10 qualities. And just to highlight some, and you've got a little piece, you can read about this in the book, and there's some handouts on your table, little menu things. But what does the 4.0 smart learner do that's different? One of the things that he or she does is use imagination. It's hard to imagine, but we've got to get better. It's one thing human beings can add to the world. So let's try to figure out how to bring more imagination into our work, into our trainings, into our helping others, and into our own lives. Because we know if we can imagine something, that's a really big step in achieving it. So imagination is a very key thing. The whole self. We know that the whole body is a learning mechanism. We think it's just up here in the prefrontal cortex. But, the prefrontal cortex is only about 0.5% of the brain. And the rest is, a lot of our learning happens unconsciously. You know this because you're probably reading a lot of the neuroscience stuff I am. But you know that you have to give the brain time to consolidate and store information. And that happens without our conscious attention. Let's say we take a walk, or we run, or we take a rest, or we divert our attention to something artistic. That's part of our learning process. It's helping us consolidate. We know that there are certain times a day when you can prime your brain to be able to remember better the things that you want to remember. We know that when we are in a situation where something isn't right, do you ever feel that kind of gut thing? Our body is a most amazing sensor, but we have learned to ignore it. And now it's time that we have this magnificent capacity that we use a tiny percent. It's sort of like in the cosmos now, scientists have been focusing mostly on the things you can see, right? And now we know that 95, 96, 97% of everything that's out in the cosmos is dark matter, dark energy. It's the equivalent of our unconscious. Our unconscious is unbelievably powerful, and it can help us if we know how to access it better. And, that has to do with brain waves. It has to do with managing our revving up of chemicals, a lot of things like that. All of this knowledge is just waiting to be had. But you know what? It has to be had by the person. We, in our training field in learning and development, sometimes think we need to do it to them. But no. We need to help them understand this so they can do it to themselves. That's the Smart Learning Organization on steroids. Another couple things, resource versatile. The 4.0 learner, we've talked a lot about learning style. In fact, my son was just saying, well, we don't know the learning style of our baby. And I said, well, that'll be really interesting. But you know what? When she gets bigger, she's going to have to learn from whatever comes at her. It's nice to know your style. But if you wait around for everything that's coming to you in your style, you're going to fall behind. You've got to be versatile with resources. And most people don't know how to read a book. They don't know how to read an article. You give them a case study, and they don't understand how it's structured. And if you don't understand how it's structured, how can you possibly really learn from it? Or a game. There are fundamentals of being able to use a game. Game people know it. Maybe we should learn it ourselves. So when we're playing a game, we say, this is what's happening in this game. I get it. This is how I can access more. Conversations. Listening. The resource versatile learner is going to be so much more developed and so much happier and so much less stressed, I think. Okay, and then shared learning, obviously. Once we know all of this, we need to share it. I think teams can be put on steroids too, not in the sense of overstress, but in the sense of inculcating 4.0 learning. Why shouldn't every project team be a learning team in a very direct sense? They know the 10 qualities. They know how to support each other. They know the agendas personal agendas that everybody's working on. They know how to steer a learning process. But we spend a lot of time on project management and not enough time on the learning part that a team can be so good at if they understand how learning works. Change agency. We all need to be change agents. People leave learning programs, for example, and they go out into the real world, and they're there in their world all the time. They should be the transfer agents. Instead, we're thinking often primarily about how do we get their manager to do something that makes sure that they learn, that they apply. How can we manipulate the environment so that it makes it easier for people to apply what they've learned? Yeah, that's a good thing to think about, but why not say to have the learner feel, hey, I'm going out from this program, I'm a powerful agent for change. What do I need to do to make those changes happen in the environment and in me? How do I change my own habits and that sort of thing? Change agency is a really important skill, and very few people have the basic fundamental capability around change agency or the self-image and mindset about it. I'm being kind of extreme in my critique, but think about this as really amplifying how we learn. Another, co-evolving with technology. Think about the scenarios for technology that many people are developing now. They're very dystopian. Technology is going to advance, and then we will basically be servants to it. I say, we need to co-evolve with our technology. Technology gets smarter, we get smarter. Technology gets smarter, we get smarter than that. We are smart because we understand the technology that we're using. A friend of mine who runs an enterprise software business says, that we design software knowing that 90% of its capabilities will never be used. Because if they were, it would all crash. Well, look at all that capability that was there if the people could only access it. So we have to, whenever we bring in a piece of technology, can we help people co-evolve and get smarter with it? I'll just pick out a couple more. Anywhere, anytime, need to be able to learn anywhere. And let's see, smart information use. This is a very important one for society as well as for us personally. So much information comes at us, and look at this, I'll just pick on the fake news thing in the world today, which is easy to pick on. Why are we so vulnerable? How can we help people not be vulnerable? How can we help people be really good users of information, sensing propaganda, sensing manipulation? We really, really, really need to help people be able to do that. This is something that our future depends on. I see some primary schools are starting to teach kids to be able to differentiate a bit. But be a smart user. Ask, where does this come from? What's the source? Okay, that would be one question we just naturally ask. Okay. So this is Learning 4.0, and I just think it's going to be a very critical factor in our ability to succeed and move into the future with a sense of power, potency, and joy. Now, just a quick thing on the professional's role. I've been around the field for a long time, maybe longer than most of you. Has anybody been in the field for 40 years or more? So I claim seniority, okay? So let me just bring a little bit of my seniority to you. Looking back on the field, how it's evolved. 50s. I wasn't there in the 50s, I must admit, but that was when the school came to corporations. GE set up its management institute. It was like a university inside the school. That's what training and development, learning and development was. In the 60s, you saw a little bit more happening. There was data processing was coming in, sales training. There were bits and pieces of training happening kind of in isolation in the big companies. But, before that, there really wasn't much training going on and development, learning or organization development. Then the 70s, there was kind of a search for identity. Career development sort of arose, and training and development was going, and organization development, everybody kind of doing their thing, but in a little bit bigger way. And the question started to be asked, what is this thing that relates to development? What is it? And the 80s began to answer that question. In fact, I led a competency study in 1983 for ASTD. And the fundamental question is, what is the field? What is the field? And we came out with some definitional things. And then in the 90s, there's more and more development happening. People are becoming more important in corporations. More and more money is being spent on it. And of course, as more and more money is spent, people get to ask the question, what's the return on investment? And people like Jack Phillips in his work became very prominent in looking at ROI. And then as we got into the thousands, of course, you started seeing more of a systemic approach. Performance consulting came in, and technology began to be a factor in computer-aided education. And then in the 10s, I see us really focusing a lot on personalizing. Does that kind of resonate a little bit with you guys? The one thing that all of these have in common is this. The learner is primarily treated as an object. Even today, when we say, oh, people can't concentrate for more than 10 minutes, we better do short things. Or how can we, design so that their attention will be better? Okay, those are okay things to think about, but it only goes so far. We're still thinking about the learner as object. And the learner can sit back and say, oh, they're doing all this stuff for me. This is great. Now, so we're focusing on how can we make things learnable, and that's good. Now, I think, as we move into the future, it's all about what if we unleash the learner now to be a full participant, about those 10 qualities, taking the MD role, managing director role of their job. And we focus on the learner as an agent versus an object. And I hope you will leave with this one thought. Look at everything you do and ask yourself, am I treating the learner as an object, or am I treating the learner as an agent? Agent as partner, agent as responsible. Agent, let's say in evaluating, here's one sign. We evaluate a program and we ask about the facilitator, the program, the environment, the manager, but we don't ask about the learner. Rate your preparation, rate your participation, rate how you supported other people, rate your commitment to doing what you say you want to do. Do you do that? So bringing that learner in as a partner and as an agent is key. And here, just to show you how it's so sneaky how this paradigm persists. So just this. Micro-learning, this is out of a May Training and Development. Micro-learning, defined as learning that occurs in bite-sized chunks that are less than 15 minutes, is a hot topic in talent development, and for good reason. With a plethora of competing distractions and shrinking attention spans, attracting and keeping employee attention has never been more difficult. The learner as object. Don't get mad at me. It's good to be concerned about this, but it does not go far enough. Another example. Adaptive learning technology is any system that takes information about a learner's skill, knowledge, and performance levels and uses it to change a material or task presented to the learner. Okay, that's great. How about if the learner does that? How about equipping the learner to do that? The learner is, when we look at it, the 70-20-10 model, 10%, look, 10%, no, it's not 10%. It's like 2 or 3% of all the learning people do is under the direction of somebody who knows how to design learning. 20 or more percent is under the direction of non-professionals who don't know anything about learning either. And then the rest of it is all designed and managed by the learner who doesn't know as much about learning either. So we have sort of a collective, incompetence in some cases around high-level learning. So the learner needs to take some responsibility here. It doesn't take us off the hook at all. But I think it means that we need to design for learnerability as well as learnability. And one final one. The speaker will explore how to produce behavior change among individuals and demonstrate specific techniques and incentive programs that are tailored to the person's readiness for change. You see what I mean? Learner as object, not learner as agent. Now again, it's a good thing to design really fantastic programs, but it doesn't go far enough. And we might not even do that if we come from a perspective of the learner as agent. It opens up a whole new paradigm that changes what we do. So the question is, are we in this, as we move into this world of augmented humans, we're already augmented. Where's my phone? We're already augmented in so many ways. But are we going to be an object with the object or an agent with the object? I think this is the most important challenge of our time, is to ensure that people are smarter than the technology they're using. So my challenge to you is to unleash the smart learning enterprise. And some tools that I would invite you to look at. In the first place, plan to upgrade everybody to 4.0. And that means helping people see what it is. Just even the mindset of 4.0 is a great thing. And then design your learning for agency. What does that mean? It means designing in more time for imagination. It means designing with the whole body in mind so that you don't just, have like hours and hours of intellectual content and not allow the body to move. That's just an easy thing. It means that when we're going to put people into a case study, we start it by saying, okay, we're going to do a case study. Let's look at how case studies are structured so that you can approach this with the optimum capability. Okay? And I really urge you, and this is a push for this book. When I wrote this book, my intention was to have it in the hands of over 1 million people because I want to see change in how we approach learning. I think it is the secret to the evolution that we need in the future. So a really inexpensive way to do that. And I am marketing, but I don't care even if I make any money at it. I just want people to take that responsibility, like that gardener in Africa who realized he had customers and had unleashed all of that energy to feeling good and to making more contribution. Also, I want to invite you, I have an app. It's called Brighter Every Day. It's free. Every day you get a tip. And the tip says, here's something you can do today to become a better learner. And then it says why. There's a little teaching point. And it only takes one screen on a phone. So if you do it every day, even, quite frankly, even if you don't exactly do it, if you just read it and think about it and sometimes do it, it should make a difference in your world of learning. And it is free. It's going to go on Android sometime before the end of the year. And that's free. And then if you want some more stuff, you can head to Learning 4.0, where I put book reviews and blogs and articles, and I'm hoping to interview people and stuff like that. But, I'd really like to see a movement here around Learning 4.0. And as we kind of move forward, let me just say this. We have not any idea what the human being is capable of. We simply do not know. 100 billion neurons, 1,000 trillion connections, all of that capacity that we can have when we synergize. We just don't know. And there are senses we may have that we haven't really developed, like maybe ESP, or our connection, really amping up our ability to connect emotionally and tuning into that. We just don't know what we're capable of. We do know that we're evolving epigenetically. We're even changing genetically in one human lifetime now. And that's a very exciting prospect, but we need to, I think, do it in a smart and knowledgeable way. So it's a very exciting future. I wish I was going to be around to see my granddaughter see 80 years of it or 90 years of it. But it could also go in another direction, because it will go in another direction if we continue to look at people as objects and not as agents. And that's the thought point I would like to leave with you today.